This will be one installment in a lesson series on animal behavior, examples of the scientific method in action. In this lesson, we'll look at the behavior of the black-headed gull. It's a ground-nesting bird species. Here we see the mother here and some chicks in the nest, and the mother has picked up an empty eggshell. So one of the chicks just came out of that eggshell there, and she's going to fly away and drop that eggshell some distance from the nest. Now, you might think that that's just an idiosyncratic behavior, but it turns out that lots of the females of the species do this. In fact, other ground nesting birds do this as well. And so scientists presumed that this had some kind of value, some kind of survival value. It served a purpose, this behavior, so we can call it adaptive behavior. And this is one of the things we typically see in nature, that animals routinely don't do really silly things. So prey species don't run into the jaws of predators, or else they wouldn't be around to make offspring. So the fact that this behavior is found widespread in the species, the females will remove the eggshells from the nest, suggests that it has some kind of value, some adaptive value. So why, then, are the mothers doing this? Well, in the 1960s, a new breed of scientists started to take up questions about animal behavior, and several hypotheses presented themselves. So remember, a hypothesis is a first attempt to explain something, and we're trying to explain the behavior of this bird. Well, one, the sharp shell edges could injure newly hatched chicks, so maybe leaving the eggshells in the nest would pose a danger to other chicks. The unhatched eggs could be trapped inside hatched shells, thereby reducing the ability of the other eggs to hatch. So maybe other eggs in the nest, when they were hatching, they would be caught inside this one, and it would create problems for the hatching chick. Hatched shells could interfere with brooding. Remember, the females have to sort of sit on the eggs to keep them warm, and when they start hatching, maybe the eggshells would prevent the mother from sort of sitting on the eggs and such. Hatched shells could reduce nest hygiene, increase the risk of bacterial infection. So maybe by removing the eggshell, you're just kind of keeping your nest tidy and clean. And the fifth one, hatched shells could reduce nest camouflage, thereby increasing the risk of visually oriented predators. So perhaps having eggshells around makes the nest more visible to potential predators. In fact, the outside of the egg has this coloration here. The inside of the egg is more kind of whitish. So if the eggshell were just sitting around near the nest, that white interior of the egg might be especially visible to predators. We're going to focus on that fifth one, and we're going to convert that hypothesis into a form of A causes B. Eggshells cause predator visits. So by removing the eggshells, mama bird is protecting her offspring. Now, we've learned a little bit about how do you test a hypothesis that says something like A causes B. Well, first, let's identify the variable. The variable is going to be the eggshells. That's the factor of interest. We want to know whether eggshells are causing predators to visit the nest. So the variable is going to be eggshells, and then we're going to set up two conditions in our experiment. A simple experiment then can be seen in this diagram. We set up some nests with no eggshells and nests with eggshells in an environment that has the typical predators, and then we simply measure predators to the nest. Incidentally, should mention, who are the predators of these gulls? Well, crows, for example, but there can be other kinds of predators as well. There can be mammals, can sometimes raid a nest, or reptiles, snakes, and so on. So multiple kinds of predators. But here then the idea is that you set up two conditions. One condition without the variable, so no eggshells here. One condition with the variable, eggshells here. And then you measure predator visits. And you do this many times. So you can set up many nests in the control category, in the experimental category, and then you tabulate your results. If we break down the hypothesis again, remember we have eggshells cause predator visits. The eggshells is the variable, but that's also, we're thinking that as the A factor. The A is causing B. And the B is what we're going to be measuring. We're measuring predator visits. And when we do the experiment, we set up two conditions, one where we supply A and one where we deny A. The condition that does not have the variables, called the control condition. The condition with the variable is the experimental condition. Now, in the 60s, a scientist by the name of Nico Tinbergen did some experiments with the black-headed gulls. And he did a more elaborate, involved experiment. Here he is pictured here. He's actually taking chicken eggs and painting them so that they resemble the eggs of the black-headed gull. And here is the design of his experiment. What he did was he set up various nests, and he would place the eggshells at different distances from the nest. So some nests, the eggshells were very close to the nest. Other nests, the eggshells were some distance away. And for some nests, the eggshells were very far away. And then he's going to measure predator visits. Here we have a crow over here. Here I just put a kind of snake here. So you're just going to sort of measure how often do predators visit each of the nests. Well, the prediction would be, if the hypothesis is true, that predators would visit the nests more often if the eggshells were closer to the nest, and less often when the eggshells are far away from the nest. So again, we always make a prediction assuming the hypothesis is true. So if it's true that eggshells cause predator visits to the nest, then the condition where the eggshells are close to the nest, we should get the greatest number of predator visits. And the condition where the eggshells are farthest from the nest, we should get the least number of predator visits, and maybe something in between for this condition up here. The actual results can be seen in this graph. Notice we have the y-axis, number of predator visits, x-axis, distance the eggshells were moved from the nest. Notice we have D1, D2, D3. That corresponds to D1 was the short distance, medium distance for D2, D3, large distance. And here were the results. We have 3 data points here. So we'll take the middle point here. So when the eggshells were placed at D2, an intermediate distance, the actual number of predator visits was this value right here. So we have a data point here, and this data point has 2 values. It has the distance, that's the x value, the distance the eggshells were from the nest, and then the y value is the number of predator visits. Notice for D1, that was a closer distance. We have to go all the way up to the data point, and that data point then indicates a high amount of predator visits. D3, all the way over here, the eggshells were far away. We go up to the data point, and that corresponds to a low number of predator visits. So we have this relationship. Now the line here just represents kind of a best fit line. The actual data points are just the points, and I've now just added sort of a line to show this relationship. Here's one way we can state the relationship. As the eggshells got farther from the nest, the number of predator visits decreased. So again, watch how I describe that. As the distance to the eggshell increased, then we look at what happened to the y value. The number of predator visits decreased. So when you want to describe results in a graph like this, start with how the x variable is changing when the distance is increased to the eggshells, and then look at the line, look at the data, and then describe how the y value changes. The number of predator visits decreases. So we can use our thinking format then to lay this out. If eggshells cause predator visits to the nest and we place eggshells at different distance from the nests, then predator visits should decrease as the distance to the eggshells increases. Remember, this prediction follows from the truth of this hypothesis and the experiment that we're doing. Well, the actual results as shown in the graph is the same as the prediction. And again, when the results match the prediction, we say the hypothesis is supported. So with the 2 experiments that I've just shown you, we do have evidence that hypothesis number 5 is supported, that by removing eggshells from the nest, this appears to protect the nest from predators. Now, that doesn't mean that the rest of these hypotheses are false. We would have to test these in some kind of way. It's just that in the 60s, this was the hypothesis that was followed up most. And in fact, scientists gathered supporting evidence that this hypothesis is true, that these eggshells are somehow reducing the camouflage of the nest. After all, the birds have good camouflage, the eggshells have camouflage. But when the eggshells are broken open, the interior of the eggshell may in fact make the nest more visible and cause predator visits, and so removing the eggshells is a useful thing to do